Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. This is Kaga. So we'll be continuing our little voyage into the Chinese main battle tanks. Continuing this week with the Tier 6 Type 85-2M. Wow, that was a mouthful. So let's go ahead and just go over some basics. Starting with some crew skills. So, just to kind of round off some of the issues that this tank has initially with getting up and going places, I have opted for off-road driving. I have then followed up with this with smooth ride because, much to my surprise, this vehicle is actually quite nice firing on the move. I wouldn't do it while traversing the turret because that adds extra bloom to it, but that's all for other consideration. For the gunner, I've gone for shoot for the hip to make the maximum extent of the aiming reticle bloom as small as possible. It's now 1/5 its original size. And of course, to further not be limited by some of the fire control systems, we've gone with quick draw to improve aim speed by 10%. It's notable that this vehicle utilizes an autoloader and therefore does not have a loader. Good and bad. So you've probably now noticed that this in the garage I only have 2 ammos types loaded onto this vehicle, and that's with very good reason. The Type 85-2M, henceforth now just the Type 85, only has access to APF-SDS and heat ammunition. Initially, you only get to fire your APF-SDS ammunition, so it makes ammo choice incredibly simple. Now, just like you would imagine, this vehicle's upgrade path is quite straightforward. You have some very straightforward lines. At first you'd be tempted, yeah, let me get that ammunition. And I would now tell you, wrong. First stop is this image stabilized fire control system to reduce your aim time by 20%, because that means that you'll just be able to put an extra 20% of rounds down range over the course of any given battle because you're spending less time aiming. And I have no statistical evidence to say that it is indeed 20%. I'm just taking a stab number on that one. After that, feel free to grab your particular ammunition types. And then when you get to the heat ammunition, it's time to stop. Because, well, this vehicle has a bunch of needs. And one of them is it's got a relatively small health pool. Upgraded, we have 1990 hit points, and I would recommend grabbing this armor retrofit slot, then grabbing the firepower retrofit slot, and then rounding it all off with the mobility retrofit slot. If you find yourself being harried by ATGMs, then you might want to put in the smoke grenades before you start these retrofit slots paths, but that's up to you. And I recommend putting this mobility retrofit slot as your last particular upgrade because the enhanced oil cooling that you can get on this vehicle's normal research path, if you haven't researched it elsewhere, it does help out in getting between point A and point B and keeping the strongest part of your turret being these turret cheeks and your, I guess that's a kind of a mantlet pointed towards the enemy so they don't get easy penetrations along this side, even though from in practice you can kind of get away with like this and this before people can start penetrating you. So it's not all bad with that. But an extra, what is it? Either 10, 12.5, or 15% traverse this way can just deny them those easy shots that much faster. And it also means that you can get your gun pointed more or less on the target that much faster. Now, let's talk about the rest of the retrofits that I would recommend putting on this vehicle. First and foremost is the gyroscopic stabilizers, because it means that you have slightly less reload time. Good. It has slightly less aim time. Really good. You're gonna notice a theme that I have going for my Chinese main battle tanks is that aim time. Aim time. And aim time. And now, appreciate that now fully upgraded we have 2.21 seconds of aim time. That's the amount of time you will spend sitting still before the aiming reticle starts to deflate down towards its minimum value. Now, I'm going to just take a quick look at... Oh yeah, we'll finish off the retrofits. There are two more retrofits that I recommend for this vehicle, and that's the internal hull reinforcement for some good old extra hit points. If you have access to... Oh, it's the armor one. If you have access to, like, your enhanced engine housing, that could be good. The reinforced ammo rack, also good, but maybe the engine would be a little bit more preferred to reinforce if it was my choice between either of these two, just because I've not had that many issues with the ammo rack detonating, I mean. So I really wouldn't worry too much about it. Also, this is one of those, I'm not certain how I feel about the reinforced wheels. I can see why you might want them. There's a number of instances where you will just end up being tracked and tracked and tracked and tracked. But, it's not a huge thing. It's annoying. It's just not game-breaking in that respect. And of course, the last retrofit being the chrome barrel lining, which increases our damage marginally, but makes our minimum accuracy, that is the largest bloom that our aiming reticle can have, even smaller still. It's so genius it can work. I swear, it works. Try it. All of these things make this a kind of like a gunslinger. It really is fantastic. Anyway, that's enough about some of the general specifics. Let's go ahead and look at some gameplay. So, what we have here is a predominantly Tier 6 rendition of the Operation Starry Night on hard difficulty. Because that's what's fun. And I'll make the admission that this is not update point 14, this is point 13, so a little out of date, but we still like it nonetheless. And yes, I'll get that right out of the way at the beginning. Yeah, I had to actually manually record this one, so there's no great, wonderful screenshots or anything. There's no funky camera angles. This is just gameplay, which isn't a problem, really and truly. But enough about that. So, right now we've talked about in the garage about how we try to make the most of the aim time whenever possible. And we also talked about in the garage about the two ammo types, and you will note that, yes, This is for one of my earlier matches in the 85 2M, and I've chosen this for a few reasons. One, because it is still an accurate representation of the tank. You could choose to not use the second ammunition type. You could also just not have it unlocked at the moment. And both options are worth looking at. And you know what? I found that I could do a little bit more effective damage with the other ammo type, but you know, as you can see, we're racking up the damage counter with this particular one ammo type option on the 85 2M without much of an issue. And you will note that I am being very forward, if you will. Very aggressive would be another way to look at it with respect to how I approach the enemy in this vehicle, and that's because at least I found that part of the Chinese flavor is a very easily penetrated front plate. Not necessarily the upper glacis, but definitely the lower glacis definitely is vulnerable enough that shots that you wouldn't otherwise suspect to penetrate in most other tanks will penetrate it. And, you know, so long as you're aware of it and you either fight from a hold down position or you force the scenario where they just are not able to get that shot, aka face hugging, then you basically made a small issue into a non-issue, and we can just worry about where is the next shot that we can put into the enemy that will do damage. And really and truly, one of those great virtues of the Chinese MIN battle tanks is to apply damage. So if you're not doing it, probably not bringing the most of your vehicle's potential in any given match. But again, there's nothing wrong. Sometimes you just don't have the option. Particularly when you're looking at enemy vehicles that are 2 tiers higher than you. One other case, and I found this to be a common weakness from the 85 2M up into the Type 90-2, is that, and I mean the Type 90-2 is the tier 7 successor to this particular vehicle, is that they're quite vulnerable to those high caliber light tanks like the M8, the Stingray 2, with their higher with the buffs to the penetration on their guns is just, and their low speed accuracy is just lethal to these machines. But so long as you're aware of that going into it, it won't be that much of an issue. At least, I don't suspect it will be. Of course, I haven't seen every possible outcome that you could run into. I'm just giving you my experiences thus far with that. And if I was to liken, at the very least, the tier 6, the tier 7 vehicles to something, and then more of a MMO type thing, I'd be likening them more towards like a martial artist rather than like the generic tank or a swordsman. They're experts at dealing damage, but there's only certain types of damage that they can withstand in certain quantities before they wilt and wither. And in that respect, they're a very team-heavy tank. And I say that because, at the very least, if you're amongst allies, even if they're not really working together, or you're not really and truly communicating the way a proper team will, and it's just kind of a bunch of individuals working it over. Teammates, or allies, do provide one solid benefit in that there are more of you to spread the love from the enemy team across, and therefore there's just less of it potentially hitting and penetrating you. And while that's potentially true, not potentially true, it's absolutely true with every other vehicle in armored warfare. It's one of those, it's almost absolutely necessary for the Chinese main battle tanks to make use of. And in that respect, they're kind of like if you're familiar with the American football analogy, the center back right there, in that while they're capable of good forward motion on their own, they're capable of very strong offensive action. They're most at home in the midst of a bunch of allies. And truth be told, this is another equally adequate analogy, since quite often, and I'm not certain if it's just my luck or whatever, I find the enemies on low enough health that I can batter them. And I do quite literally mean rev the engine and hit them. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, please consider giving it a like down below. If you're new to the channel, I hope to see you around by hitting that old subscribe button down below. Content to come this week is the launch of the Art of War special, and it's going to evolve into quite a wonderful series, so I hope you'll stick around for that. In particular, we will be looking at it from the perspective of gamers and the types of environments that we find ourselves in games, not just including, but certainly we'll look at it from the perspective of things like Armored Warfare, World of Tanks, World of Warships, War Thunder, all kinds of goodness like that. So I hope you stick around for that. And of course, I'd like to thank you for having bared with me for almost 18 minutes at this point. Thank you, and I'd like to bid you a good day and a good start to your week. Happy Monday.